Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. I am so excited to dive into our conversation with Tiankai Feng, who has joined us today. We are going to talk about the people side of analytics, a super important topic. Tiankai, I am thrilled to get to speak with you today. For those who may not know you, can you just give us a quick run through on your background, and maybe a little bit about your singing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Hello, everyone. I'm Tiankai. I currently work as a data strategy and governance lead at Thoughtworks, which is a consultancy that focusing basically on data and tech solutions. And before my job at Thoughtworks, now 1.5 years ago, I actually worked at a big sports company where I was leading the product data governance team and had various other data roles before. Along all my career, I always spent a lot of time and had a lot of passion for the people side of data, right? Which basically made me realize that when it comes to making data valuable, you actually need the people to work together on things. And that when people disagree or misunderstand each other or don't communicate well, then what's hurting is actually the value creation with data. So I always paid a lot of attention to it. And for me to make data then more approachable and more engaging, I use various inconvenient methods, most of which I'm known for, which is music, right? So I use my passion and my skills as a musician to write songs about data, some parodies about data, and different other things. And I also use memes and other ways of humor to try to communicate it. Everything that helps to break the ice and to have a more relaxed and approachable conversation about data to make things work. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. I love it. And, often when analysts are asking questions about getting into data, I do hear, what tools and techniques should I use, right? And often the answer is that the tools are going to change over time. Like, you can't make any bets on that, but working with people is something that's going to be a constant. So can you share a little bit from your perspective about the realities of working with stakeholders and what the people side of data looks like, and maybe some mistakes that people make?
Absolutely. I mean, that is a great example that you brought up, that people tend to focus more on the tools, right? What languages do I need to learn? What tools do I need to get familiar with? Everything that is basically what we call hard skills, right? And that is, of course, the basics that you need to have to actually get started to do the right things with data. But that always comes with the assumption almost that you work in data in isolation, as if everything you do is just standing in front of a coding screen in a tool and you just write like an algorithm or an SQL kind of statement, and that's all you do. But it's much more than that, right? Because in the end, you're trying to be business relevant and having an impact in business, which means you are translating business requirements into data requirements. You create something with the data, and then you need to translate it back actually to give the value to the business. And that translation itself comes with a lot of requirements of how to do that, right? First, you need to understand how to speak the language and how to make it clear what actually the data world and the business world means and how actually you can switch between those two worlds and understanding it. You need to know how to collaborate with people, right? As in, what is the way of working? Do they prefer maybe having workshops together, or do they prefer just having like daily check-ins? Do they prefer maybe only doing things via chat? You need to figure all of that out too. You need to then know how to communicate too, using the right words to be not offensive, but actually constructive, to be solution-driven, not too much problem-dwelling, right, in these kind of things. And you also then need to actually stand up for yourself sometimes, even when the things are getting out of hand, and you need to deal with conflict and resilient towards disagreements and actually navigating those situations too. So that is, for me in a nutshell, why the people side of data and analytics is so important, right? So being able to not just do the things that require hard expertise and tools, but being able to make it work in an organization with client and stakeholders and whatever to then generate value together.
I love some of the things you said. So, it's always been clear that we have to take business requirements and translate it into data. And then we separately speak about taking data that we've done and translating it back. But I've never actually heard someone say in one statement, you have to take it, translate it, and then translate it back. And that is so absolutely true. And, the part that you talked about in terms of speaking up for yourself, that is so incredibly true. You are going to have stakeholders that are going to ask for something it may be a test they want to run that doesn't have enough sample size, and you have to push back, or you have to, push back on your boss themselves. And we're always hoping that our boss is sort of going to be the gatekeeper for us, that is going to help us manage these relationships when we're junior, but that is not always the case, right? So we have to be very thoughtful about what we might encounter and how we're going to work with this. And so when speaking about the people side of data, I've heard you use the 5 C's before: competency, collaboration, creativity, communication, and conscious. Do you have tips for analysts to work with these, and how they may help you build trust and work with your stakeholders?
Absolutely. I mean, these 5 C's, first of all, come from my book, right? Humanizing Data Strategy, which was just released mid of last year. But if I would boil it down into how to get started on the human side of data, I think I would say it starts with a mindset shift, right? So, and it all starts with not treating stakeholders and clients as the others and trying to only focus on the differences with them, but actually finding common ground and commonalities and identifying what we have in common. What are our shared goals? We are, after all, in the same company, or we are having a project together, right? There's something that connects us, right? We should all have, on some level, the same goals, because we are, after all, working together on similar things. So starting there with a common ground, from there you can derive a lot of things, right? You realize maybe what you are not knowing enough in terms of your competency. You might need to learn more about a certain business aspect of it all, or how your stakeholder thinks and what the day-to-day decisions look like. Or it's about data literacy and teaching your stakeholders, for example, a little bit more of how data works and what's realistic and what is unrealistic, right? When it comes to collaboration, it's then finding that common ground. Let's set common goals. Let's maybe break it down into OKRs that we both actually support and actually have individual contributions to it, right? When it comes to communication, then you actually learn to speak the language of your stakeholders instead of trying to insist on your data language. You actually try to give analogies and to translate it, as we said before, to how they want to understand things and talk about things. And when it comes to creativity, you get more creative as well, because then you can innovate based on what actually a stakeholder wants. And finally, conscience, right? Actually having integrity, standing up for the right things, not saying yes to everything, but also looking at it from a risk and compliance point of view, but also from other aspects about technical feasibility, to then actually apply your human judgment on things and trying to do the right thing that's actually realistic. And yeah, basically, as I said before, right, if you change your mindset to find common ground and to realize that you have the same goals and it's not just the others that are always annoying you, right, then a lot of things come more intuitively in all of that.
I love that. And I have seen that, considering, these other teams as the others and they don't get our language. And one thing that I've done when, not that I noticed the problem and solved it, but after I've been around a while, even just creating stand-ups where you're inviting another team to join you. So now these people have visibility, right? You sort of have to look at it from all angles and say, okay, like, what do I actually have within my power that I can implement to try and improve these things? And there are ideas, and relationships are a two-way street, right? Like, I may also need to be attending their stand-ups, because this, like, the visibility, the communication, all of what you just said is what is going to improve the relationship, which allows us to get our ideas across, right? Because how often is it difficult to get buy-in on a project, and you can't tell if it's because, the project isn't interesting, or like, I just haven't invested enough in the relationship with these people to be able to get my thoughts across,
Yeah, I realized as well that even just communicating the intention that you want to understand proactively the other side is breaking the ice a lot, right? Because often it's like, I want to talk to you because you don't understand what I'm saying, right? That is one way to do it. Or you say, I want to understand you more. Would you let me know how I can better understand you? Can I maybe shadow you for a day and see what your day-to-day looks like? could you maybe teach me a little bit about what expertise you have so I can understand you better? And the moment you can actually ask for that understanding, you show a little bit of vulnerability because you admit that you don't know everything. And asking for help is always nicer, actually, than trying to say that you are wrong and I'm right. So if you frame it in a different way, right, it almost just opens up so many more doors for you to actually learn more and then to actually do the collaboration in a better way.
Right. And sometimes as technical people, we're not the best at framing. Maybe that doesn't come natural, but luckily we have ChatGPT these days where you can write in what you're trying to say and you can say, please reframe this in a way that is going to land well with my stakeholders. And and you'll get something back and maybe you need to tweak it. But, we have tools available that we didn't have 4 years ago. And
Absolutely.
And I agree, like with what you just said there, basically, like there are small changes that we can make that don't need to be these, huge endeavors that we take on that can really improve the relationship. And it's going to make us more successful, right? We're reframing to make ourselves more successful. Like we're not even just doing it for others. We're also doing it for ourselves.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
So you are a passionate data governance guy, and we've been talking a little bit about, really the words that we're using. How does the semantic meaning of words relate to data governance?
Absolutely. I think I realized the importance of the semantic meaning of words at the very beginning when I switched from being an analyst to actually working in data governance very quickly. Because as an analyst, you are much more welcome by business functions. They all are saying, oh, you bring us insights, bring us recommendations. Please come to us and tell us what the data says. And then when I switched to data governance and I wanted to reach out to my stakeholders to get to know them, they were all afraid, right? Or they were really resistant. They didn't even accept or reply to any of my meeting invites because I worked in the infamous data governance team all of a sudden, right? And I realized that the word governance itself is already scary. It comes with a lot of associations that I cannot control what people think about it, right? Because they might have different negative experience with governance teams overall, not just data governance. And that the word itself sounds so scary that people all just intuitively have resistance towards it. And the more I worked on it and the more I tried to break the ice around it, the more I realized it's all of the words that all of a sudden and all of the semantic meanings that play a role in it, and they lead to so many misunderstandings if you don't deal with them more intentionally, right? Just for example, when we talk about KPIs and metrics, right? That if we talk about a customer lifetime value, for example, right? And let's say there's different sales channels working with different customer lifetime value models, and they try to talk to each other and they have different definitions for it, then using the same word meaning different things can lead to a lot of confusion, right? Worst case scenario, they get communicated to higher leaders above. They realize it's all inconsistent. The whole customer lifetime value gets lack of trust because it seems to be very chaotic there, and then nobody wins in all of that, right? Or the same way as in trying to collaborate in a different way. Let's say I like to use, for example, the word task force, but other people had really bad experiences with task forces because it was always used as a way to force people to work together instead of actually finding common ground. And they say immediately no, I don't want to have a task force, and I don't even know why, right? So in a lot of ways, all of these words, using them because I think they're the right words, don't mean that the other side also thinks they're the right words. And trying to understand it then and actually bring it down to business level, collaboration level, and everything, and using actually the same words means you have to talk about it too, right? Like in, when I say this, I mean this by it. What do you mean by saying by it? Just so we're on the same page. And all of the following conversations, at least then, are on the clear ground of what we mean by things. And you don't have to let misunderstandings escalate to that certain level. So I feel like with semantic meaning, right, it started for me really on a human collaboration level. And then, of course, with a semantic layer and actually being able to connect knowledge together, information, and then showing the right things in data and making it findable, accessible, it all came with it. But it all started with on a very human level for me.
So I actually realized data governance is a different role, and we didn't define that. I think we all have in our head what an analyst actually does at a high level. Can you share with people what you are thinking about and what you're focused on as a data governance professional?
Absolutely. So in a nutshell, data governance for me ensures that data is trustworthy, right? And that means that it's being created, processed, and used in a meaningful and secure way, right? That means that it's both about risk avoidance and mitigation, as well as amplifying the value of data. And that comes with all of the things that are usually associated with data governance, like writing policies to make sure that certain risky things are not being done. It's about data quality management to ensure that we have the right definitions of what is good and bad quality. It's also about metadata, for example, to have the right data products findable and accessible, and that those are high quality and usable, for example, and everything that comes with it. And because there's so many definitions of data governance too, this is the definition I like to use because it's more on a level that everybody hopefully can understand intuitively what I mean by that. But it has always different ways of being executed depending on what the culture and the organizational structure of basically a company is, right? And but for me, that is basically what it is. Very concretely saying that means working with legal, for example, on policies to define what the data requirements out of regulations are. It means setting up a data catalog and setting up the meta model behind it. It makes basically creating a framework for data quality management and how to measure data quality, and all these kind of things are part of data governance.
Okay, awesome. And so switching gears just a little bit, but also the same, right? So you're obviously working with data. I'd like your opinion as LLMs become more popular. We've obviously, we think about, I think, structured data more when we're talking about working with data. Uh, as things progress, do you see analysts in particular having to work with unstructured data more, so text or images, or do you think, we'll still be focused on our rows and columns?
Wow, that's a really great question. I do think that analysts need to spend more time with unstructured data, but more in a sense of moving from querying data to querying information in the future more, right? So because of LLMs now having the possibility to actually process data in a much faster way and making it almost more user-friendly to interact with data, it's the analysts that actually need to now make sure that when you address, for example, a chatbot to actually get to certain insights and certain performance of KPIs, that actually it's querying the right KPIs in the right way, the way you want it to be. And I feel like only analysts are in that segue where business requirements and data understanding all come together, as we established before, right? So having an eye on it to say we need to actually use the right words and semantics to define metrics, KPIs, how to actually phrase something, for example, as well on how to communicate value and trends and so on. That also needs to be careful, but also like data objects itself, right? So I have one topic that I come across often is the difference between defining a consumer and a customer, especially when you're a retail company. And different companies have like different definitions for it that are having a lot to do with internal and external data sources, for example, right? And so there's a lot of tweaking and clarification needed. I feel like then a big chunk of the job of analysts will move to actually clarifying those, because once they don't need to actually write so much SQL codes themselves anymore, for example, and they can actually ask a chatbot, they need to make sure that the quality of what comes out of a chatbot and of LLMs actually is good. So it moves more into being almost a guardian of it all, right? Rather than actually doing the analyst hands-on job anymore.
Right. No, that's a good point, because when we move to a place where we're querying with natural language, which like SAP and other products have been coming out, we may not be thinking as much about the structure of the data in the background, but being able to set this up in a way where we're using common language, where everything is defined. And I mean, if you're here and you haven't had your first job yet in analytics, just know that it can be like a couple weeks discussion to define revenue.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
And when you have consumers and customers and all these things, and it is so different by company, that is going to be a really interesting problem in and of itself. And I think so there will be ways in which we'll be able to work with unstructured data that as an end user, it's simpler, but also there's probably going to be more use cases where we're going to work with unstructured data and we're just going to dive in. And I'm always big on saying that like that doesn't need to be scary either, because once you learn structured data and you hop over to another data type, you actually find that there's so many commonalities. Yeah, you got to learn some additional stuff, but you're well set up to start attacking that problem.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how do you think about translating these technical concepts into clear language? And how does mastering communication really help to build your career?
Yeah. I mean, so first of all, trying to actually translate technical language into clear language really is based on what the audience sees as clear, right? So there's unfortunately not a one-size-fits-all approach to say, this is the 3 things you need to do just to translate easily from technical language into clear language, because it's audience specific, right? And because it's audience specific, it always starts with understanding the audience first before you decide how to actually translate it. And now actually working as a consultant, I realize it even more that when I work with clients from different industries, of course, they would speak a different language because they're used to a very different business model and a very different environment among each other. So even just trying to then use analogies that are relevant to them to like address like a certain architecture that is very complicated on the technical level, to then bring it up to, let's say, a different analogy to make it clearer, that takes some effort to actually do it. And for example, if I work with an infrastructure client, I might use more of a analogy of building a house, right? You build a foundation and then you need like the infrastructure with the pipes and everything, and then you actually build on it, for example. Whereas if it's a sports company, for example, I might use a football analogy and say something about players and referees and actually setting up the rules, and then basically having like different games and winning and losing and what does that actually mean and so on. So you have to then get creative to actually speak the language of your audience, and that requires understanding them. And that is also the part where, when we say mastering communication, I think it's not per se to just memorize certain words to always use. It's actually the method of understanding an audience as quickly as possible and being able to capture their language as quickly as possible that actually makes it a superpower, right? Because it means you're actually mastering adaptation of your communication rather than always using the same ways of doing it, because that's never going to work. So yeah, that means, how do you get to know someone quickly? How do you then be able to read between the lines and understand the patterns of how they use language, and then actually apply it to how you want to communicate it to them? That takes efforts and practice, but it's doable. And if you focus on it early enough in your career, then it can actually really be helpful.
No, and I love the fact that you mentioned that it takes practice, right? Like just like we're going to sit down and we're going to look at our resume when we're interviewing, and we're going to come up with answering those questions in a star format. We're going to think about the points that we want to share so that we don't miss anything. Like this is the same thing. Like you can sit at your desk and be like, okay, I need to explain this customer analysis to this level of person, you know, and if they're really high up, I'm maybe going to get 3 minutes. And if they're, you know, up here, I can maybe use more technical terms, and really sitting and thinking about, you know, what is the best way to do this? It isn't something that just, you know, we say use good communication and you're like walking over to your stakeholder's desk and you're like, I'm going to communicate this well this time, right? Like, no, you're actually sitting down and I don't think we like bake any time into the day for this, right? But it's still, it does take time, and it is a skill, and it is something that we need to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. I also, one thing I learned actually is to exactly what you said, to actually set up that time before an important meeting to actually think about what language we want to use and what topics you actually want to cover. Like, never actually be completely unprepared to go in, because it's unfortunately that if you then accidentally say something that is not resonant or that seems even offensive, that it's very hard to come back from it, right? Because you leave a really bad first impression in the first place, and then changing that first impression to a better one is always a lot more effort than having done a good first impression in the first place, right? So
Yep.
just from a very human level, right? If you prepare a little bit, let's say just 10 minutes before a meeting instead of 0 minutes, then it's much more likely that you start on a great note and you can actually build on a great collaboration rather than having to clean it up again afterwards because you realize you made a mistake, right? So
Yeah.
just be more intentional. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's not even like saying something offensive, right? I've gone into meetings where I had p-values on my slides and I completely derailed a meeting and never got it back, right? Like most of my biggest learning experiences have been through pain and making mistakes for sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so do you see commonalities, just bringing it back to your music, do you see
Sure.
commonalities between how we use language as analysts and we're thinking about that and how you're thinking about language as a musician?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I feel like because I love to talk about music as a language too, right? So music is such a language that doesn't use words, but every time we listen to music, it creates certain emotions within us, right? Because we associate a certain feeling with it. And it's something that's very hard to put into words, ironically, right? It's something where just like, I really like this music and somehow it gives me goosebumps, but I cannot put into words why. It's just something that really makes my body tingle and I really love listening to it for some reason. And if you think about that, then it's such a physical and emotional reaction that you have that if you make it more explicit in language, why should you pay less attention to it, right? Why should you underestimate the power of words then? If music can does it, then words can do it even more. And we all know that we are sensitive to certain words ourselves or certain ways of phrasing to us because we associate certain triggers with it. And we should only assume that other people are dealing with it too, right? So just as in music, where you make choices what to play in what way, when you make live music, me on the piano, for example, I decide in what volume I play things, how quickly I play it, what kind of rhythm I decide to play it. Then I should be intentional about how I use my words and my language too, for example, right? And I think one more aspect to it is that music can be done alone, or you can do it in teams. And if you think about it then, and when you create language, you can also have a narrative that you do work together as a team, or you decide to do it solo, right? But either way, it has pros and cons. And you need to then basically, in a team, much more harmonize with each other. Just as in, if you play out of rhythm or out of tune with the band, you're going to be the one that brings the whole sound down. So if you're the one that uses the wrong language compared to the rest of the team, you're also going to bring chaos into and mayhem into all of it because you're confusing everyone basically about what you're saying. So in that way, I think there's a lot of analogies there. I almost feel like personally that being a musician helped me actually a lot in how I communicate because I often think about how I act as an artist with an instrument compared to how I act as a communicator in a professional setting and how I would actually act either way, vice versa, and then get better at it. So yeah, whoever has hobbies maybe in music, think about it. It might be a nice analogy you can apply to your life too.
Well, if you're
Yeah.
ever playing with multiple people, don't invite me because I'm tone deaf and I will bring it down. We'll bring it down. So before, I think it is time to head into questions. So if you haven't added your questions to the Q&A yet, make sure you drop it in there. So we're heading over. But I do want to share the links for Tiankai's Humanizing Data Strategy book and also his YouTube where he has a lot of his data music. So you can go and check that out. Okay, so now we are over to the question and answer. Giovanni asked, what are your thoughts on the top-down approach versus a bottom-up approach when communicating with stakeholders?
That's a interesting question. I'm thinking what top-down communication or bottom-up communication means, but assuming that that means that you either talk to as someone who's less senior, talking to someone who's more senior first, or if you make a senior leader actually talk to the operational people more, my answer would be ideally both, right? By even just trying to ensure that it happens top-down and bottom-up, you actually would have created buy-in on all sides first. So actually it gets communicated in all directions. I think when I talk about top-down and bottom-up, it's always more about also cultural changes and change transformation in teams, right? Where it's always a question, do I enforce the top-down or do I let it bottom-up, basically sprout up, right? But it's always best when it happens both. So letting the senior leaders see the value in it and they actually sponsoring a change and being behind it, whereas bottom-up people can answer all of the details questions and being the operational catalysts to actually drive a change. And in communication, it's the same, right? If a senior leader can say with confidence, I'm behind this, and this is now important for everyone, please talk to everyone on the ground to figure out the details, but we're all standing behind this. And then the ones on the ground actually be able to translate the technical language into clear language again for communicating it among the people on the ground, then I think that balance can work really well.
Love that. Okay, so Timothy asked, as someone new to data analysis, what steps can I take to adopt the 5 C's framework in my routine tasks? How can I start small to build a solid data strategy over time?
Yeah, good question. I think let me start by answering the second question first, and then actually it already answers part of the first one. To start small to build a solid data strategy means identifying where data brings value first, right? So it's always about, data strategy is always about aligning data efforts with business goals, right? So if you can identify which data efforts actually bring the most value, then at least you can already scope it down and prioritize it to a small critical set of use cases, so-called, right? And if you break it down, then you can actually focus your efforts and you don't have to deal with all of the data stuff, but you create a strategy just for those, which means bringing people, process, and technology together, right? Make those 3 aspects work together in a nice way, and then actually generate value in the most effective and efficient way. With those 5 C's, I would apply them to those use cases too, right? Because with those, you have a clear set of stakeholders ideally identified, a clear set of collaborators, and a clear set of leaders and sponsors they need to work with. So then it's all up to making the collaboration work with them, creating those shared goals that I mentioned before, and finding common ground, learning how to communicate by learning more about how the business expertise actually works and those business areas that you are collaborating with. And also then basically applying communication skills and creativity skills and conscience to the right way. But I think by boiling it down to use cases that you can focus on, it's a much easier head start to then say, I'm going to try to apply these 5 C's in this limited set of stakeholders and things that I need to deal with. And then I can actually learn from it and apply it in a much scalable way.
Okay, so the next one is from David. He said, does the translation back and forth between analysts and business people necessarily mean different dashboards, different presentations to each? I posted in chat, but thought I'd post here to make sure question gets addressed.
Interesting question. Because what your question implies that dashboards are a matter of translation itself, right? Whereas I would have said that dashboards are a result of a translation itself. What I mean by that is that there's more work to be done and translation needed before the dashboard even exists, because the requirements towards the dashboard usually is where most of the difficult conversations happen, right? Let's say a typical example is a stakeholder asking for a real-time dashboard, whereas the data is never even needed in real time. It's maybe used for once a week or once a month decision. So why would you even need a real-time streaming data dashboard if you don't use it that way, right? So translating requirements, talking about the same language, then using the right metrics and calling them the right way to then inform the right decisions actually takes a lot of planning work. And when the dashboard then finally exists, it actually should already address the translated needs itself. So I don't think you need different dashboards, because the dashboard itself should have been a result of a translation. And ideally, I would even say as little dashboard as you need to actually make then the stakeholders happy and they feel completely understood by what the dashboard gives them, should actually be the right way to look at it, and not aim for more and more dashboards to hope that it translates better. Exactly.
No more dashboards.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, awesome. So I think those were the only questions we had. Thank you so much, Tiankai. If people want to find and follow you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn very active. So anyone who's interested, get in touch. Always happy to catch up with people as well and to learn about what they are dealing with and what kind of what's happening basically in the world and in the data space. Otherwise, again, check just my YouTube channel, right, as you mentioned before, to find out how I like to apply the language of music to the language of data, right, and how to bring it together to potentially break the ice. And otherwise, just if you found that interesting, check out my book, Humanizing Data Strategy. Always happy to get more thoughts and opinions about it as well. Yeah.
All right, amazing. Thank you so much for coming today. I really enjoyed our conversation. It was great to talk a little bit about stakeholders and how we interact with them. And I really appreciate what we got to touch on here.
Thank you so much.
All right, awesome. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.